Yo, it's Kim, and if you've been on this channel before, you know what this is all about. Today we're comparing two popular micro four thirds lenses, the Lumix 14-42 3.5 to 5.6 and the Lumix 12-60mm 3.5 to 5.6. So both of these lenses come as kit lenses for different cameras. The 14-42 comes with the G7 and it sells for about $250 separately. The 12-60 comes with the G85, but it's about $500 bought separately. Now most people that get the G7 jump into primes or maybe the 12-35 Pro Zoom, but that's about $1,000. Another option would be the 12-60 Panasonic, that's a 2.8 to f4, but that's about $800. There's also the 14-140, and that's about $700. So let's just call it what it is. That's pretty steep. Times are hard, and maybe there's a better alternative. Starting off with sharpness, the 12-60 at its widest focal length, that's 12mm, and at 18mm, 25mm, and 40mm are slightly sharper than the 14-42. Here's an example of a comparison. This is at 18mm at f5.6. You can see that the center is sharper, but the top right edge is sharper on the 14-42. However, it looks more pleasing on the 12-60, and I think that's just because it has more contrast. And in this example, you can see that it's not always about absolute sharpness. Contrast actually plays a role in how sharp we perceive an image. I also compared it to one of the sharpest lenses I have, that's the 42.5 1.7 from Lumix, and while it isn't as sharp as the prime lens, it focuses closer and it seems to have more contrast and saturation as well. Now being able to compare a zoom and a prime in terms of those qualities already says a lot. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the 12-60 has more saturation and contrast versus the 14-42. However, I didn't even notice this until I started making this video and starting seeing side-by-side comparisons. If you really care about image quality, I think you'll be able to see it. However, 99% of the people out there probably won't be able to. Moving on to usability, starting off with the build, the 14-42 is tiny. This is clearly a micro four thirds lens. It's also just made of plastic. Even the mount is plastic, but it does save you a lot of weight. On the other hand, the 12-60 is bigger. It's about 100 grams heavier, but it's made with a mix of plastics and metal. However, the important thing is that the mount is metal. Also, this is obvious, but the 12-60 obviously has a longer zoom range. Being a bit wider and longer, you'd be surprised at how much of a difference this makes, especially for vlogging and travel. Moving on to stabilization, the 14-42 has Mega OIS and the 12-60 has Power OIS, and I was never really sure how much of a difference there was. However, in previous tests, I was able to shoot the 14-42 at 25mm at about 1/6 of a second. Now with the 12-60 at 25mm, I was able to shoot at about 1/3 of a second, so that's about one extra stop over the 14-42. But in terms of video, I did a walking test on the G7, and there's a difference in walking and hand-holding with a non-stabilized body like the G7. It's not big enough that I'll use any of the 12-60 handheld walking shots, but for panning, it can help. I also think the added size of the 12-60 adds a little bit more stability and helps it in this regard. However, the difference in stability becomes more pronounced when you use it on a body with in-body stabilization. I used this on the G85 and it's pretty obvious which lens I was using for which take. The walking shots are almost usable on the 12-60, but they were definitely not usable on the 14-42. So overall, for stills, the 12-60 adds an extra stop of stabilization. In video, if you don't have a stabilized body, I don't think it'll make that much of a difference, but if you happen to have a body with IBIS, then it will make a difference. Moving on to macro, and this was a really interesting point. One thing I like to do when I buy a lens is look at how versatile it is, and one of the aspects I look for is its close focusing capability. The 12-60 can focus closer and is also sharper than the 14-42. There's really no competition here, but I was so impressed I decided to compare it to my pseudo macro lens, the 42.5 1.7. And the results are surprising. The prime lens is sharper, but only if you pixel peep. Overall, the 12-60 has slightly more saturation and contrast, which makes the image look sharp as well. But the 12-60 can focus so much closer, it's also a bigger factor in getting a better image. Basically, even though the prime lens is a little bit sharper, the zoom lens has more contrast and saturation, and it can focus so much closer, it'll give you better macro images overall. So overall, the 12-60 edges out the 14-42 in a lot of ways. This 12-60 is overall sharper, it's got more contrast, it's got better stabilization, and it's got better macro capabilities. And really, the only thing that the 14 to 42 has going for it is its size and weight. The 12 to 60 won't replace prime lenses, but it has enough sharpness and contrast to compete. It also won't replace pro zooms, but you have a better zoom range, you have good macro capability, and it's a lot more affordable. So if you wanted the best bang for the buck, do-it-all lens, you can't do better than this.